I'm glad you're here today for the culminating event in our International Women's Day celebration. Before I begin, I'd like to say the thank yous that are so dearly owed to the people who have put this, this whole series of events together. The behind-the-scenes people. They include my co-PI, Bob Moret. Is Bob still here? Admiral Moret? The wonderful staff of the International Relations Program, done all the yeoman's work in terms of organizing and budgeting and catering and brochures. Thank you very much to my fabulous quartet. The Maxwell Dean's Office, who are supporting our events as part of the 90th anniversary celebration of the Maxwell School. And my new partners, the Institute for Veterans and Military Families and the Office of Veterans and Military Affairs. They've been a true pleasure to work with, and I look forward to long and successful partnership. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome some very special guests who have spent the day with us, first in a panel on women serving in combat and post-combat zones, and later on a career panel. If you could just raise your hand. Dr. Alexander, are you here? Oh, great. Dr. Deborah Alexander. She has a PhD in social science from Maxwell, and we have her bio available. She'll be here at the reception. Alexandria Wise, Bachelor of Arts, 2002, History and Political Science. And Lamy Schleiman, Master of Arts in International Relations. We had an amazing afternoon with them, and we thank you for your presence here today. All three will be with us at the reception if any of you would like to speak with them. Since 1975, the United Nations has observed International Women's Day annually as part of its official calendar. This year, the official date is March 8th, but the UN allows member states to choose a date that accords with its local custom. We're not quite a member state of the UN, but here at SU we have a local custom called spring break. So we're observing International Women's Day yesterday and today. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is the clarion call of the United Nations Women's Beijing Plus 20 campaign, which is empowering women, empowering humanity. And we've chosen this year to use our local celebration to honor and explore the contributions women have made and continue to make every day in combat and post-combat zones. We want to celebrate their contributions, acknowledge their sacrifices, and benefit from their experiences and wisdom. We had a wonderful panel yesterday on the dynamic response of our local Veterans Affairs Medical Center in their dramatic changes they've undertaken to meet women's health care needs, especially the needs of post-9/11 veterans. Earlier today, we had the pleasure of a panel discussion with the three distinguished alumni I just introduced to you. And this afternoon, we're going to hear from a leader in public and military service offering her views on the challenges and opportunities for community and military engagement. Our Chancellor, Kent Severud, has dedicated Syracuse University to being the best place for veterans. Our aspirations to be that place are greatly advanced by the presence on our campus of the Institute for Veterans and Military Families. Through the leadership of IVMF, Executive Director and Founder Mike Haney, the Institute has become a national leader in hands-on programs, activities, and projects focused on helping veterans and military families make the transition to post-service life. Dr. Haney is now also SU's Vice Chancellor for Veterans and Military Affairs, and in our discussions with him, we found him to be a partner who understands the benefits for our civilian students of having veterans here on campus. Graduates of the program that I chair, the International Relations Program, as well as all other programs within the Maxwell School, regularly serve in combat and post-combat zones and missions. Many of our IR students are ROTC cadets. I see some of them here today. It's great to acknowledge their presence. By joining forces with IVMF and Ron, your organization, we're able to advance our students' understanding of military service and veterans' experience, and thereby enhance their own education as they go forth and work in State Department, Department of Defense, local agencies, and overseas NGOs and development agencies. Please join me now in welcoming Vice Chancellor Mike Haney.
Thank you, and thanks all of you. On behalf of Syracuse University, I'd like to welcome you, and particularly General Singh, to this very special event, celebrating the accomplishments and the sacrifice of those American women who have served in uniform. Some of you have heard me say before that I do, all of a sudden I got loud.
You're okay.
I do truly believe that today's great universities and great university leaders will be defined and redefined based on the choices they make, positioned to engage and empower this generation of Americans who have worn the cloth of the nation, specifically during this time of war. The best universities, I believe, will enact conditions where those men and women can serve all of us again as alumni, as leaders on campus, in our classrooms, on our athletic teams, in our student government, in a way that not only elevates themselves, but elevates their academic institutions as national leaders in the pursuit of social and economic prosperity for the next century. And that's why I'm so excited about the small duty that I have today, that is to introduce an extraordinary leader and citizen, somebody who is truly an exemplar of the notion of service before self, and someone who can and will speak with a real depth and passion about the inherent connection between our military, our society, and public service. Linda Singh is somebody who wears many hats. As a senior leader for Accenture, one of the world's leading organizations, private sector organizations, counting more than 320,000 employees, offices and operations in more than 200 cities, 56 countries, and net revenues last year that exceeded $30 billion. In addition to her role at Accenture Federal Services as a managing director, General Singh manages a second career as a general officer in the Maryland National Guard, a military career that she has devoted more than 32 years of her life to in service of. All of us who have had the privilege and the honor of getting to know General Singh were thrilled to learn that earlier this year, Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley selected General Singh for appointment as the next Adjutant General of the state of Maryland, commander of the Maryland Guard. Matter of fact, her ceremony to officially assume that role, quite literally, is tomorrow morning. She's having her uniforms pressed as we speak. It is truly a historic appointment, as General Singh will become the first female and the first African American to command the Maryland National Guard. I remember as I was thinking about what to say to introduce General Singh, I recalled a quote that I heard once, something from Muhammad Ali, who said that service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And if that's true, ladies and gentlemen, the woman that you're about to hear from has her rent paid in full for the rest of her days. So please help me welcome General Singh.
Thank you. So wow, that means I don't have to pay I'll tell that to my financial institution that I don't have to pay my mortgage now for the rest of my life. I'm sure that'll go over well. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and actually speak this afternoon. And I do actually have a little extra time tomorrow because my ceremony is in the afternoon, but I have to actually get there and run through everything to make sure that they've got it synchronized just correctly, and then I know where I'm supposed to stand and all of the other things. So it's just a few things. But before I start into the presentation, and because we have the time, I really wanted to be able to share just a couple of things about my background and what got me into, why did I join the military? And if you went out and looked at some of the stories, well, then you're already going to know this for the most part. But I joined the National Guard actually at age 17. And it was, I'm not real sure that at the time that I had really thought about joining the military, other than it happened to be a good idea at the time. And I say that because I left home at age 16. I was actually an honor roll student. I played basketball. I ran track, so I was very sportsly. I was a tomboy. I grew up in the country. I had some issues at home and had to leave home at age 16 and found myself on my own, and I ended up actually quitting school. And the reason why I talk about this is because there are different paths that people take to get to where they need to go. And where I thought my mind was is I felt like at that time, if you would ask me at age 16, I was going to go to the University of Maryland. I was going to be in their ROTC program. I was going to be an electrical engineer because I wanted to be a lineman. If you know what a lineman is, it's actually out there hooking up the power lines for AT&T long lines. That's what I wanted to do. Okay. Obviously, somebody else had a different design for me. So, when I left home, I ended up being on my own. And why do you not, and I know that we talked on the other panel, ask for help? Well, it's not so easy to do when you're 16 and you don't even know who to ask for help. You don't want to ask your family because you feel like you're not sure, who you can trust at that point. So I think what was very interesting is I got a job and started working, so I had to quit school because I couldn't do both. I just couldn't. My basketball coach never knew what was going on until this week, by the way. He is elderly. I'm actually going to be paying him a call this weekend. But he actually got interviewed just this past week. And unfortunately, he never knew what was going on in my life. He says, I never knew it on the court. She never showed it in school. He says she was a good kid. So the fact that things turned out well for me made him feel pretty good. And the fact that he had a hand in helping, to make that happen, I think made him feel pretty good. But I wanted to be able to take the opportunity to be able to say thank you to him before I did not get the opportunity to do so. So I'm going to be calling him and saying, thank him. Just, thank you for what you did for me, because he picked me up and dropped me off for practice every single day, and he didn't have to do that. And so then, when I think of, I worked and I slept sometimes where I worked because I didn't necessarily always have a place. And I ran into the recruiting stand. They were in the mall and they were just kind of sitting there. And I had no clue really about the military. I really did not. Other than I had several uncles who were drafted during Vietnam. I had one who was injured during Vietnam. And then, the other two were in Germany. That was really the only thing I understood about the military. My grandfather was in the Navy, but he never really talked about it. So I decided, looks like a good thing. They're offering me a way that I can get paid. They're offering me the ability to put a roof over my head. I signed up. And that was in, I don't know, maybe the April or May time frame. I think I signed the papers in June. What was interesting is I wasn't talking to my parents, so they actually had to sign for me. So the recruiter took care of that for me because I didn't do it. I was like, well, you're going to have to get the paper signed. If you want me to go, you have to get the paper signed. So he took it to my parents and got it signed. That is probably one of the best, most craziest things I've ever done. Because I didn't know where I was going to end up. I had no idea that I would spend, and actually I'm coming up on my 34th year anniversary, June 3rd, and I had no idea that I would end up here. So when I think of military service and military in the community, and why is that important, and why am I starting off that way, is one, to give you a little insight into me, but two, that National Guard recruiting team was in my community. They were in my mall, or what I call my mall. It's my mall. And they were looking for young recruits, right? Folks that they could bring in. And just by that engagement, changed my whole life. It changed how I've lived my life. It's changed how I've impacted the world, I think. Just off of that one engagement. Now you're looking at someone that really didn't understand the military. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. I had absolutely no clue. So I think that, if I think about most people like me, don't understand the military. And they don't understand the value of what the military adds to their organizations within the communities. But what's more importantly is that they're usually invisible. They're invisible within our communities in most cases. Up until probably 9/11, they've been very invisible. And I say that it's not a bad thing, but it just is. And so I think, what I'm hoping to bring is a very different perspective on, well, why do you think they were invisible? And why do you think there's so much value? And then how do we engage differently? Because I think that there's probably going to be different schools of thought. And if you go back and look at some of the research, I think you would see where they felt like, yes, the military might have been in the communities, but it was not really high impact. They had their job to do. They were going to go to war, do whatever it was, but it was really not impacting the communities. And I would say that hopefully by the end of this, you will actually see that maybe we need to do some more research to really get a better understanding of, well, what is the true impact and what is the longer term enduring impact that the military has on our communities in terms of, whether we're shutting down bases, in terms of whether they're deploying. And so those are the things, and that's hoping where I'm going to lead the discussion. And what I would say is if you want to ask me a question, please do. Don't wait until the end. You can interrupt me. I'm usually pretty good at trying to stay on track of where I left off at. I also tried to use something that was so this is not Accenture branded, by the way, the presentation, because I wouldn't be able to do this in Accenture, and it's probably not military branded, so that's why I just love doing it. Okay, so we see that? Because that's a combination of kind of the military and the community there walking, because it's, they're kind of walking in that military mode, and I thought that this was kind of, most fitting for the overall presentation, and plus it allows me to do something different. I can step outside the zone. So, if we take a look at the first piece I want to hit on is the socioeconomic impact, and really what I think that means. So this is Linda Singh's view, and have I, done some research and reading in this area? Absolutely, but also I look at some of the discussions, I'll draw it into, what are some of the discussions that I'm having today that's actually brought this to the forefront of my mind, and why is it so important? And I'll even tie in the aspects of what does it mean for men and women, because I think it's slightly different as we think about International Women's Day. Then the engagement opportunities that we have. So what are the various ways that we can actually engage, or even the various ways that the military can reach out and engage? Uh-oh, there we go. And then looking at the military-civilian partnership is what I call. Because ultimately, I think at the end, we have to transcend and we have to get to more of a public-private partnership with what's going on out there if we want to change the way that we see the world. And then, I do have questions here at the end, but please don't wait for the questions. So let's just talk about the social economic piece of it. If I think about prior to 9/11, I'm not sure how many of you would remember when they talked about what they called BRAC. It's the base realignment and closures. Do you remember the BRAC? So some of you are like, no, I don't remember that. So some of you do. So let me explain what was happening during that time. Post-Cold War, they started looking at, oh my God, we have way too many installations, more than what we need. It's costing us money, and we need to actually take a look at which ones need to close. We need to do some consolidation, right? So a lot of it was being driven by money, and it was being driven by the ability for sustainment. And so if you think about that, they came up with this huge plan that says we're going to take a look at all the bases, and we're going to figure out which ones need to be shut down. So if you think about shutting down a military base, now, so this is active military bases. That means that there are many communities within communities. So that means you're going to shut down a community and you're going to move them someplace else. So that's essentially what they were doing. And they had to do it over a period of time. And as a matter of fact, they started out in I want to say it was like 1986 when they actually started out, 85, 86, with going through the different studies. They really didn't get to taking action upon a lot of that realignment because it got hung up in the political environment until like 2004, maybe 2005 was when I think they really started taking effect. So if you just think about, I have military communities within communities. Now you may say, and what a lot of the research was saying prior to 9/11, and then even some recent research, it was actually saying, well, you know what? If you take and shut down a military base, and let's just say that that base has, 15,000 service members on it. That's 15,000 in many cases times by 2 because they 9 times out of 10 have spouses. But it's not an even number, but let's just say for the sake of the argument. And let's just say, oh, by the way, they each have at least 1 to 2 children. That happens to be in either the schools that are surrounding the base or in schools that are on the base. Most bases don't have enough schools to accommodate all the military children, so 9 times out of 10, they're being pushed out into the community schools. For that base to actually exist, there was an infrastructure that was built up around it. There were buildings that were, other companies that built their infrastructure up in and around it to be able to support the military. There are civilians that actually are hired onto those bases that support the military. So if I was to say I'm going to shut down that base, the argument was, well, you're only losing the job of that military individual and maybe whoever supports the military base. So you guys are students. Would that be the right way to look at it? Is that correct? And you haven't even looked at the research. You know that's not correct, right? So let's just think, well, what if I'm at one of those bases, okay? My husband's probably working someplace else. He's probably not working on the base because it is different when you have a male and a female spouse, by the way. They're just starting to figure that out, even though they keep calling my husband Mr. Spouse. He actually got something in the mail, let me just tell you. Just about 2 weeks ago, it was an email from the National Guard Bureau that welcomed him to and congratulated him on my accomplishment of becoming the Adjutant General, and it actually called him Mrs. Singh. Perfect. That's great. No. He didn't attend any meetings all this week because he was really pissed off about that. So if we think about, the military community as a whole, the point was that they felt like they could just move these communities and the only people it impacted was the military. What they didn't think about was the number of businesses, the number of additional jobs. They really weren't thinking about the spouses that had careers that, oh, by the way, they're now going to have to move. They weren't really thinking about the schools that had expanded to take in the extra load of the children. They really weren't thinking about the various businesses that decided to expand because they had so much business from the troops that decided to eat at those restaurants or decided to use the stores. They just said there's a 1-for-1 impact, basically, right? One troop is going to move, one job is lost. So if I think, okay, does that really, really make sense? And when I think of what it takes for us to put those infrastructures in, the other thing that they didn't plan for is how much money it was going to take to not only shut the base down, to reappropriate it to somebody else, to move all those resources, and oh, by the way, where are you going to put them? Because there's a cost to that. It's not just that I shut down and save money. There is a cost. And so it's very interesting how we look at this whole BRAC process. And I think that we've learned something. Were you going to raise your hand? Oh, you were just moving. Okay. You got to be careful because I'll call on you. And so what we're finding is that it's not a one-for-one. Because these communities, and so what they haven't gone back to do is that these communities where we've actually shut these bases down, if they had a very large and high-growing economy, they may have done okay. But if they did not, and that military business happened to be part of the growth driver, then what we're finding is that they still have not recovered from the shutdown of those bases and the moving of those communities. So what do? Do you think that we stop there? Do you think that we're going to do this again? And why does this set and resonate so much with me? Because there's other pieces of the community that we don't think about. Let's think about the National Guard and Reserves. The National Guard and Reserves actually lives within the community. They don't necessarily reside at any of these bases, but yet they spend a lot of their money, time, and efforts into the communities because that's where they live, right? They buy homes in the communities. They're using the local grocery stores, markets, or whatever. And most of the time, if I move a unit that's National Guard, I don't think about it impacting the community. I've never thought about it impacting the community. I've always thought about, do I have strategic positioning? Because I have to be able to support the governor. Very different than what active military thinks about how they move bases. They don't think about strategic positioning. They're thinking about consolidation and where do we need to consolidate and where do we need to move. About a month ago, maybe not even a month ago, about 3 weeks ago, I went to what we call a listening session at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And it was a session because we're getting ready to go through, not necessarily maybe a BRAC process again, but we could be. But we're getting ready to go through significant cuts. And I think we all know that there's significant downsizing coming with the military. And they're trying to figure out where they're going to take these cuts. And so the Army is doing what they call these listening sessions. It's where they invite the community in so that they can hear what the community has to say in terms of what is the impact. You may not be following this, but what happened at Aberdeen Proving Ground is that Aberdeen Proving Ground I'd say within the last 6 years, grew because they took and moved a significant Army element from New Jersey to Aberdeen. People moved with it. They reestablished themselves. We built new infrastructure around it. Defense contractors moved and put significant, corporate buildings in and around that installation. Because of the influx of school kids, and they could not be contained or supported on base, they built new schools. This is actually in Hartford County, Maryland. So I'm there because I'm actually representing, that particular day I was representing the governor. This was like one of my first tasks after the inauguration. It was representing him at this listening session. And as I listened to the emotions that pulled out of all these individuals who are now being told that they may have to move again, or by the way, they may not have a job. And as I'm listening to the community saying what it means for them to lose 4,000 service members, they talked about it from a perspective that I had never really thought about. And they're saying, I'm a school teacher. We've just built new schools, and you're now going to significantly impact our school system. You're going to significantly impact our ability to keep the school open potentially because the majority of your students go to my school. Hadn't thought about that. There were people that stood up there and said, you know, my business solely depends on the service members that are here on this installation, because my business happens to be in the PX, the post exchange, that is on base. And we move from off post to on post because you asked us to. So now my business is probably going to shut down. I'm like, wow. By the end of the night, my eyes were pretty wide open. And why does it make sense to me? Because also within that same community, about 10 miles away, I have an installation that we may be losing structure in the out years. And it started me thinking about this in tandem is kind of setting the conditions to where we can significantly impact a big county, actually Hartford County in Maryland, without having really intended to do so. That means that we're going to impact the lives of other individuals. It's not just the military that we're now going to impact. That gave me a whole new perspective, something totally different that I don't think that we actually consider enough of the impact that the military has. So let's think about Fort Bragg. Let's say that I'm not moving a base. And I don't know how many of you have you ever lived in and around Fort Bragg? Because if you have, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty monstrous base. There's a lot of, the town in and around it supports it, right? You know that you're in Bragg country, right? I mean, the town just thrives off of Fort Bragg. Have you ever been down there when they've deployed the 82nd Airborne in total? It's like a ghost town. It's like a ghost town. And you know, why do I bring that up? Because that also has an impact on the economy. You know, we deploy 20,000 troops. Do you think that that's not going to impact a small business? It absolutely does. It absolutely does. So just when I think from the socioeconomic perspective, when we think about how the military impacts us day in and day out, this is probably more from the, you know, what do we do from a military perspective? But I want you to understand that when you see your communities are not thriving as well as they could have because it's taken a huge hit, those could be unintended consequences, right? We just don't think about it in that way. Now, what usually ends up happening in these communities, our folks build networks. I know that, I don't know how many of you know someone other than you guys, right? Because you guys are all going to be in the military here at some point, and maybe not. Yeah, you are, because you're going to be committed at some point, right? Yes? So how many of you know someone that's in the military? Or have, okay. How many of you have family members that are in the military? Yes. So let's just say Linda Singh went to Kosovo. I went to Kosovo in 2006 to 2007. That was a year, it was a 16-month deployment for me, so it was longer than a year. My daughters, I have two daughters, one's 32 and one's 21. My oldest was already out of school, so she was okay. My youngest was in elementary school. My husband, right, had to become Mr. Mom. So why do I talk about the community because my husband had to rely on the community to help him, right? That community effect to be able to get through. You know, when he did not know how to deal with the little Miss Muffin when she was having young girl problems, right? He surely could count on my neighbor because she understood that, right? So the community was there to support him. If I think, you know, because it's different for men and women. My husband would never, ever go out and ask for help, right? The women, you know, the men will set it up so that they've got help. But if I switch that around and I'm a female that's deploying, unfortunately the process is still set up a little bit so that it supports more of the males than it does the females. It doesn't always think. I mean, still to this day and age, if somebody sends my husband a letter and says, Mrs. Singh, that's a problem, because it surely wasn't addressed to me. So it was addressed to him and it went to his email. So that was a problem. So it's just the mindset and, you know, how it impacts us. Does that mean that we have not made progress? No, we've made significant progress with women in the military. But I think what's happened is that, you know, women may not have necessarily had the voice that we're getting now. But if I think, you know, if a soldier deploys, like myself, I have to rely on my community to take care of my family. I absolutely have to rely on the network that I have out there. So, you know, what ended up happening for my husband? So my husband, he can cook okay. I mean, he does pretty well. You know? But is he cooking every single day? No, he does not. So his sister, who happens to live, one of his sisters lives in Trinidad. His one sister lives 5 minutes from us. He has a brother that lives 10 minutes, another brother that lives 15 minutes. We have best friends that are about 10 minutes away. And it became a family affair. Everyone took turns in making sure that they had a part to play while I was gone, including my next door neighbor, right? Including my next door neighbor. Me being gone impacted them in a sense that they were missing me every single, I mean, it was very, very different. It was just a very different perspective. So also, let's think about my job. That took me out of my job, out of leading a team for actually 18 months from my job. So that impacts that community, right? So let's think of that interrelation. So what did I start doing so that people could figure out, well, what do we do to support you? I started communicating to them what it was like. Well, here's what it's like to be me. Here's what it's like for me to deploy, and here's what I need from the community. I think what happens now is it's so much more visible because during the Vietnam War, it wasn't, right? We knew that they were fighting. It wasn't a popular war. Now, there's probably not a person who doesn't go by. If they're in uniform, you're going to say thank you for their service. The community is more connected. But let me tell you just how far it even went. In my second deployment, my next door neighbor, who my husband became very good friends with, a different neighbor than this one, he's from India. Every week on Friday, he had what he called dosa night. So dosa is an Indian food that they cook. And he had my husband over every Friday night and cooked dosa for my family. So he contributed his part. No one asked him to do it. My husband's sister would make a meal every Wednesday and send it home. So somebody would stop by and pick it up and they'd take it home. No one told them to do it. My company and community, so folks from multiple states, sent care packages because now it's personal and it was visible to them. No one told them to do it. So I, in turn, in order to be able to engage with them, to let them know, well, what is it like? I started sending notes. Here's what I experienced today. Well, if I was doing consulting work, here's what this would mean. I'm working with the Afghan National Forces. We've actually developed performance metrics. These metrics are what we're going to use to evaluate them. That makes sense in a consulting speak. The letters that I sent to my family were slightly different. But it was all about helping them to connect. So now when I start thinking about the network, I start talking to my troops about deployments. I start talking to them about when we're going to move units. Even if we're National Guard and I move a unit, because of some of the sensitivity that I now have, I'm telling them we're going to go out and we're going to hold a session in the community. Because I want to make sure that I understand more of the impact that we're going to have if we make a decision that is going to cause them any kind of harm. I know that sometimes we can't always do that because of the political motivations. But when I think about where I'm sitting today, at least I can do it. And I can actually reach out to the community because the community has been there to support us. So I want to make sure that we're doing a two-way street. So now that's just on the feel-good side of things, right? So, we build the formal and informal networks that are out there. I am sure, so when I think of, IVMF, I consider to be a formal network, kind of in a sense that's out there now because of the level that you guys have gotten to. But if I think a lot of the nonprofit organizations that have built business around supporting veterans, that didn't exist in the 60s. Did not exist. If I think the companies that are actually doing business to support our military, yes, there's always been companies that supported the Department of Defense, but not in the manners that they're doing it today, which is all focused on how do I provide care to the veteran. So let's just think when we start, does the military have any kind of relationship or impact with the community? Absolutely. We are embedded in the fabric of the community no matter where you look. We come from the community. We are part of the community. And I guarantee you, if you look around, you know someone or know someone that knows someone that's in the military. So the engagement is there. We're not foreign, we're just people. And we're part of the society, right? Or maybe not. So then when I think about, well, how do we actually engage and get involved? Well, we have tons of ways that didn't exist before. And to me, this is where, you get the volunteering. You can actually go out. I have individuals that come out with the Girl Scouts into our units, and they actually interact. We actually help. So I awarded the little Girl Scout. I was never a Girl Scout, so this was pretty cool to me, but they were getting their badges. And they had just finished doing some work with us, and so they were able, this particular unit had taken on this Girl Scout troop, and they were now getting their badges. And they asked me if I would come down because they said, well, they're used to being their military police. They said they're used to being with all of us guys. Will you come down and actually present the badges? And when I look at these young girls getting those badges, and then they're looking at me and saying, well, what does that mean? What does that star mean? Star means I'm, pretty high up there. And they were just amazed. We've never had that level of engagement before. We've never had that level of impact. As a matter of fact, I have someone that wants us to get involved with the Boy Scouts and actually do it's a massive program, and I don't know that we can do it because the law prohibits so many things these days, but it's one of those ones where they want us to engage with the Boy Scouts and do a huge jamboree in the southern part of Maryland that we've never done before, right? It's stuff like that where now the community is saying, how can we work together to make our communities better? And so when I think about involvement, in the session before we talked about the coaching, the mentoring, and even the tutoring. I actually had someone that I linked up with my daughter to help tutor her and some of her friends while I was gone. I actually linked up, so Accenture is a very global organization, and we did, a friend of mine who lives in France, he has 3 sons, and his middle son was learning English, right? So they have to take English. So he was really wanting to come to the U.S. So he had not been to the U.S. So my youngest daughter is fluent in French, and I said, voila, send him over. You know, he'll come stay with us. That backfired on me a little bit, because he forgot to tell me that he was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, absolutely gorgeous 16-year-old boy that, you know, when he walked off the plane, my mouth dropped open and I go, oh my God, I'm locking the doors. And they actually still keep in touch today. But what was interesting is that he really wanted to interact with our family. He was intrigued because I was in the military. And he was intrigued because she's in the military. She has a daughter who speaks fluent French. And yeah, I'll come live with them he was with us for 15 days. And we took him to events with us, so I could actually help him, you know, I took him with a couple of events, my military events, and it was pretty interesting. So just helping to really do some of the, I think was me more mentoring and coaching in a very different way, more outward, and getting people to understand what it's like to be in the military because they have an overall interest. If I think of the veterans that are out there today, we have more veterans out in the communities today than we ever have, ever. And it is going to increase. And it's going to continue to increase, right? They're going to continue to cycle. And these particular aspects of getting involved through various organizations, whether you decide to host, you know, something yourself, what I would say is if you live in a community, and I know that, you know, most of you are here on the school campus, but if you go out and you're at home, look at your broader community and look at who the individuals are there. Start engaging very differently to actually improve the level of the collective whole. I think that's where we get extreme value by doing this, and not just because we've got the military in the community and what's the impact of it. I just think that it adds extreme value. Let's think about higher education. You know, how do we get, and I know that is a huge task for the school here, is how do we get more military into higher education? Well, let me explain. We see that a lot on the active component side. You don't see as many military with higher level degrees. Sometimes it's slightly different on the reserve side. I know I have people looking at me like, what do you mean? Well, because they're part-time service members. They're actually working a dual career. And they've gone to school, all while doing all this. I can actually take you into one of my units where about 50% of my enlisted force, which means non-officer, have advanced degrees. And I don't even like sitting with them because they're pretty sharp. They're really, really smart. They talk over my head. And the field that they're in is intelligence. And they have advanced degrees. Actually, in that group, I have several E4s that have PhDs. And then when you start turning around and asking them who they work for, they work for companies like mine. I mean, they're not working for Accenture, but they're working for the Booz Allens, they're working for the Northrop Grummans, you know, slightly different than if I put them in a pool with, well, what are my active component folks doing? Unless you come out of an ROTC program, you may or may not have a degree yet, right? So we're starting to, I think, trying to change that. So let's think about, how we get more and more from a higher education perspective. My daughter can actually point out 2 folks who's actually in her program at UMBC that are also soldiers in the Maryland Guard. And she just happened to see the uniform and asked them, and she goes, "Do you know?" And they go, "Sing." And they go, "No." And she goes, "Yeah." "You're General Singh's daughter?" "Yes." Wow. So think from a higher education perspective. And then we've talked about community support, just kind of across the board. When I think of all of the various ways, from a federal government perspective, from a state and local government perspective, if I look at private organizations, everyone has some slice that they are doing to kind of support that military aspect, right? They're partnering in very different ways. What I think is, when I was if I think back to Accenture, when I first joined them, I never talked about being in the military. Didn't. 0. There are people who knew me that knew I was in the military, but I never, ever talked about it. If you go back and look at any story in Accenture on me, prior to, I'd have to say, 2004, it never highlighted me being in the military. So let me explain how the difference happened. I found my value. I found the value that I could bring with my knowledge and experience as a military member that could drive business. As soon as that happened, I became the great new candy on the shelf, right? Because it totally transformed then the way that we looked at how we were going about our business, because we now had a subject matter expert that we didn't have before. And then we said, oh, we have to get more of those. When it really changed was in 2008, when I came back from Kosovo and was asked to lead our Army account. That's when I knew the company, the people, understood the value. So let's talk about what it is since I came back from Afghanistan. Did we take that up a notch? Do you think that it's now part of what's driving part of our corporate citizenship business, this whole engagement with veterans? Do you think that we haven't set hiring goals around veterans? We wouldn't have done that 10, 15 years ago. We weren't doing it. Because we now understand the value that the military has with our overall business and the value that that brings. And we also know that it gives us richer communities. It gives us richer businesses. Which really hits me into, how do we do this whole military-civilian partnership? Well, first off, I've engaged quite a bit with the civilian organizations in terms of the services that they provide to the veterans, but more importantly, how can the veterans help them? How can we help drive things in a very different way? I'm actually starting, instead of having the community now who has supported us for the last 10 years, really the last decade, I'm now asking my soldiers, okay, I want to know where you live. I want to know what community activities you're involved with. I want to know what civic activities you're involved with. If you are here working and you're not teaching that Little League team, then you need to leave. I need you teaching the Little League teams. Those are the conversations that I'm having with my folks and saying, let's reach out the other way. Because I know by that involvement, it's not only awareness, but it's increasing, it's adding to the richness. We no longer become visible and invisible. You know, we're no longer invisible, and we actually become visible within the communities. And I'm going to tell you, does that mean that, you know, when I'm asked to stop in and have a conversation with a class or whatever, other than me traveling up here because it just gives me different problems, but I usually stop in uniform. Because I want to keep it visible. I want folks to feel like it's just normal. Because they're part of us. It's just another profession. I don't want someone to grow up and not say, I don't know anybody in the military. I don't want someone to grow up and say, I don't know what it's like for someone to be in the military. Because 9 times out of 10, 6 degrees of separation, they're going to know somebody. Right? So I think that that's impactful. So let's think about, you know, how can we really continue to fuel our communities? Do you know that veteran small businesses contribute to, what was the amount? Do you guys remember the amount it was? It's a significant amount.
1.2 trillion in GDP.
$1.2 trillion in GDP. I know I couldn't remember. I know it was like some huge amount. My mouth dropped open when I heard that the first time. That's veteran-owned businesses contribute that much. So let's talk about how do we do this better? Because if they're adding that amount, can you imagine if we start getting more entrepreneurs out there in terms from a veteran perspective, if we start helping them to understand how they invest and grow their businesses to fuel the economy. Amazing things just happen. It really, really does. And this is actually going to be one of the key things, and I know we didn't talk about it today in our conversations, but it's going to be one of the key things that I'm going to be driving in Maryland, because the governor's plan is to bring more small businesses. So I'm then going to say to him, so how many of those small businesses are going to be veteran-owned? And how are you going to help to drive and grow veteran-owned businesses? Because we have a population of veterans that sit about this much, right? You know, I'll be able to give him the numbers, because I think that's important. We don't do it just because it's a good thing to do. We do it because it's the right thing for our economy. It's the right thing for our society. So then if we think about the veteran workforce development programs and the education programs, you guys have one of the best ones here, here at Syracuse. It is by far one of the best that I've seen. And I've been involved with a lot of them, let me tell you. You have no idea how many nonprofits actually knock on my door every single day. And it's a lot. It is a lot. And if there's got to be a way that I somehow have to figure out how I separate all of those. And then if we think about the local organizations that can provide solutions, you know, we're actually teaming with some veterans organizations to do some things differently. We're actually teaming with Veterans Affairs to try to think about their business differently, their business model differently, and how they serve the veterans. Let's just think of, you know, I think Accenture is taking maybe even a different perspective, like a lot of our delivery work, our IT and technology work that's driven out of our solution centers. We're saying we would like to staff most of our solution centers with veterans and let them drive the solutions for business. So we're looking at ways to be able to do that. Because we think that that partnership, us helping to develop that, is extremely important. You know, we also talked about the services of the utilities and infrastructures and operations. So there's one of the guys that came out of the Maryland Guard, And because of his background, and what I still can't get is that he was actually an A-10 pilot. If you know what an A-10 is, that's a fighter pilot. But he used his skills and background, which has nothing to do with him being a pilot, so I still haven't figured it out, to actually get into sustainability and sustainable energy. And getting into the technology that, when we go through, oh gosh, what is it called? When we actually go through the different tunnels and whatnot, and they have the little transponders that kind of, clicks down the money, that basically I can drive on an expressway and not have to stop and pay at a booth, at a toll booth. Well, when that technology was first being developed, he was actually one of the ones that came up with that and started getting to them to look at using that differently. Even to the point that in Virginia, if you're actually using that, it's actually linked to your driver's license. And he started using that technology to not only so that you're going to go through these expressways and pay your tolls, but if you are behind in child support, that they can actually link back and figure out where you are to be able to nail you for unpaid child support. That's a veteran that did that, by the way. I'm still trying to figure out because he was an A-10 pilot. Go figure. Don't know. And he is still working in doing more sustainable type projects because that's what's driving his passion. And he felt like, we go into these countries and we do all these different things, but why can't we bring some of that thinking here to increase, and making our country a lot more sustainable? Let's think about strategically partnering to reduce costs. This is one where I think if we are going to fix the problems we have today with our deficit, we are going to have to go down this path in different ways and maybe even go to the extreme. And until we can get past the political agendas and partner strategically, we will not be able to solve the problems in a manner that we should. We're going to continue to fight about it. And then developing, the solutions. And I think ultimately where this ends up is it really does get into stronger communities, stronger involvement just across the board. Just across the board. And so when I think about, long way around and where we kind of have gone with this particular thing is I really wanted to increase the awareness of, is there even an impact that the military has on our communities? It's not the fact that they just go off and, go to war. What is that impact? What are the various ways that the military can have an impact that we just don't necessarily think about it? How do we solve for that? I think it's extremely challenging for organizations like, the National Guard. I mean, we have, just like active Army and some of the other, I don't think the Marines have as big of a deal. The Air Force has somewhat of a problem as well. I think it's mostly the Army and the Air Force that have the issues, but Army more so, where we have excess capacity that we can't even offload because we can't afford to offload it because so we're paying for it, it's sitting empty, and we can't afford to offload it because it's just too expensive. So we're trying to look at different ways to be able to do this. The building that my headquarters is in costs the state of Maryland $500,000 a year just to operate. And the building is the building was up in I think it's 1901 or something like that, 1941, somewhere around there. So in the 1900s, it's an old building. And we were looking at trying to get the state to do what we call a shopping kind of center, right? Let's do something totally different. Let's take this historic building that, oh, by the way, we can't tear down, and let's turn it into something different. Well, that's going to cost a significant amount of money. We actually brought in folks and we're trying to do more of what I talked about, some of this public-private partnership stuff, and it may be a bridge too far. So what's going to happen is if we end up having to keep the building, then the conversations of where I'm driving them already is, how do I get companies to come in and help me make this building more efficient so that I can afford to operate it? And then maybe I can stay there. How can I renovate it? What are ways that I can do that? They're getting very good at is what I call go find the OPM. And they're like, well, what's OPM? It's other people's money. There are grants and things out there that we can get to be able to go down this path, go find them, and tell me, how do we use that to improve this? Because the challenge is that even though I would really love to move out of that community, everyone in and around that particular armory has a sense of security because we're there. I have no weapons in that building, by the way, so not really sure why they're so secure, but anyway. But they feel like that there is a sense of security just with us being there. And so there's angst about even us moving. And so when I think about that, I try to think of different ways for us to be able to engage with the community so that we have a somewhat of a jointness, so that maybe I'm not impacting them in ways that I never intended. Maybe that other leaders are not impacting them in ways that was never intended. And when I go and actually present to the governor and saying, I need more money for X from an operations perspective, or when we say that we're losing this unit, I guarantee you that we're going to be looking at the socioeconomic impact of it and what it does to the broader community. Because right now, my big concern is, at least for me in the state of Maryland, I know it's like this across many other states, is I've got, there's a couple of things that I could do that could actually impact one whole county within a period of 4 years. And it's causing us to now have to say, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe I need to come up with some better solutions to be able to get to the end game and deal with all the political stuff a little bit later. So if I think about just the impacts, what the community and the military, to me, those are mutually inclusive of one another. They're not separate. I don't see them as separate, other than I do a different profession than somebody else does. It's just like being a doctor and a nurse, right? So I think with that, what questions do you all have for me? Questions? You can ask me anything. It doesn't even have to be about this. Go ahead.
So, the post-Cold War drawdown,
Yes.
impact on the reserves was different than the impact on the regular uniformed forces, and it differentially, more heavily impacted the regulars. There's also a pattern of race and gender in the drawdown. So I'm wondering, you've been kind of mentioning political here and there, and I'm looking around saying, well, political, that's what we do.
Right.
So how can the academic community provide information and support for the kinds of, the shape that you would like to see the assessment taking place on the impacts of your community? What should we be doing?
Yeah, so one of the things is when I look at the gender, so this is going to be a huge shift. We know that by 2020, there will be more females in the military than there will be males. They will be the dominating, that's the way the trend is going. So what does that mean? That means that a lot of places, a lot of our buildings, a lot of our facilities that are older than 50 years old, right, even 40 years old, they are not adequately equipped to deal with that massive change. Right? They're not dual, what we call dual gender supported. When I think about the change that needs to occur, I think that we really have to ensure that our young women are, understanding that they now have a choice. They have a choice that they didn't have before. And that is they can choose the career path that they want very openly. You know, there's still a few that they're still working on, but pretty much they're going to be able to choose any career path. So if I think of research, if you go down and do any research on, you know, the gender biases, looking at just, you know, women in the workplace and how they lead differently than men, because there are differences just in the way that we think, and that's okay. Actually, that's what makes the world go round. I think dispelling, you know, doing research that's going to bring to light the value versus letting the myths continue to prevail is important. It doesn't mean that, you know, women make better managers than men. It means that we need different types of leaders with different capabilities, different thinking styles. And so if I think of just from a research perspective, looking at those various angles, I think is extremely important. Another thing that, you know, I didn't really talk about it is really our disabled veterans, right? Our service members that are disabled. What we have to understand is that that's an extremely important part of the veteran community, but it's only a small part. And, you know, what we're starting to see happen is that there's so much being diverted to this side that the people who don't qualify under that particular piece, we're kind of leaving them over on this side. And I think that we have a kind of a middle segment that is going to be missed and that we're going to pay for 30 years down the road. Because we will be providing mental health services for those individuals that we just didn't catch early enough. And we're not looking at that because they don't fit this category. So those are some different ways that immediately rolls off to me. The other thing that I think that we have to look at is what is the long-term impact of war on women? I haven't done that research. What's interesting is women have been in war in various supporting roles for a very, very long time. But we've never done the research to say, well, what is the impact? And are their needs different than our male counterparts? That research needs to be done, and we need to start tracking it. So we have to get I think we have to get ahead of this. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we don't understand the long-term effects of this decade-long war or decade-long conflict or whatever you want to call it. We barely understand the effects of what has happened from Vietnam. So the more that we can bring in, you know, folks from from the researching community to really look at this. And I'm not talking about, you know, making their political statements. I'm talking about with real research to back it up and to really put out there so that we can get the right solutions, the better off we're going to be as a community. So, questions? Yes.
When you're in the listening event you're at, and people tell you how difficult it would be to close this facility, and you're believing them, yet money is finite.
That's right.
And you must close something. Are there any thoughts about how to relieve that impact that's going to happen to those people? Do you think that through too?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, since I was representing the governor at this one and it was an active Army installation, that may be losing jobs, so they won't totally shut down. We're looking at, first off, for that particular organization and where they are going to have to take the cuts, we think that the research is absolutely wrong. In this particular case, the Army just says, I'm looking at all these units and we're going to apply this formula to every single unit. What they're gaining the support for is being able to go back and say, if you shut down these things and I lose this number of personnel, then research and development for future types of equipment and things like that just stops. Something has to stop, something has to give. And I don't think that's the right answer either. So I think for that particular community, we're going to be able to preserve that, and my guess is that they will be left alone, and that cut has to be distributed someplace else. We don't know that we're going to be successful in that, but we'll know here in about 2-3 months. And then, you know, from an alternative perspective, the commander and I are actually meeting to talk about then how do we start now engaging the community to figure out how do we, you know, maybe there's something else that has to be brought in. This has to be brought to the governor's attention so that he understands the impact, because he hasn't seen the pieces that we have. He's looking at trying to get some larger businesses in. Well, maybe that's where those businesses need to go instead of versus more of the southern counties. So we are taking a look at how do we deal with this. The particular unit that I may be losing, it's not so much of, you know, I'm going to lose individuals, it's I'm going to lose a capability. And these people will be put out of a job, which means I need to get a different capability. I'm going to lose the A-10s. That's a huge political campaign. And my folks are worried about, well, I work on the A-10s, and what am I going to do if you lose the A-10s? So that's, you know, it's not a bigger piece. It's not 4,000. It's a much smaller pool. But nonetheless, it significantly impacts, you know, that same community that I am like really, actually in the Baltimore paper today, they did an article on me in Black History Month, and the first thing it starts out with, I was in an A-10 simulator when they did it. And I crashed, by the way. And they actually put that in the paper. I'm like, really? Did you have to put that in the paper? That I crashed the A-10? It was a simulator, thank goodness. But so, you know, we are looking at how do we engage that a little differently. And I'm probably more the one that's kind of said to them, look, we need to look at this a little differently. Because it hit me very clearly that night that I was just like, oh my God, I had no clue.
General Singh, I was hoping to ask you, step out of the U.S. context, but I'm interested in the question of engagement and partnership, but overseas. And you mentioned your tours in both Kosovo and Afghanistan. And as you know, I also, on the civilian side, was there. And so I'm interested in what kind of training did you receive, and what was your experiences in working with a variety of other civilian agencies, organizations, NGOs, IOs, and your experiences with that kind of engagement? Thank you.
That's actually a good question, because when I think back to my first deployment, I actually went to a school out in Monterey that actually really gets you more into the cultural aspects of what you're going to be facing. So we started talking more about the cultural pieces there. It also gives us, you know, during those sessions, they actually bring in a lot of the NGOs. We had folks from USAID that talked to us. What I think is interesting is, because I'm a logistician by trade, and usually when I'm kind of shutting down things, I'm starting to deal with USAID and some of the other folks. So my relationship ends up being slightly different sometimes when I'm starting to look at turning things over to them. When I think about just going into a country, they make us do a lot of studying about the country, especially about the culture that we're going into. Going into Afghanistan was different than going into Kosovo. I went into Kosovo after, you know, things were pretty calm. It's a peacekeeping mission. Going into Afghanistan, totally different. And I did even more research, because my name has a particular meaning, has a particular history to it in Afghanistan. No one had ever really thought about that. Well, I thought about it, right? Because I was going over and being a mentor for a general, and I'm wondering, how is this person going to engage with me when I think of the history of having the name Singh? And if you go back and look, it's it's not a pleasant, it was not a pleasant interaction. And so, you know, Singhs were the Sikhs that were in there, I mean, really pounding them at one point in time. So I was real concerned as in how this was going to come out. And so what was it that I needed to change, just my interaction as I dealt with them, and did I need additional training? What ended up happening is that, I'm just going to tell you, the Afghans were so intrigued with me being a senior black female officer that I think everything else was forgotten. So, I mean, I'd walk in and they were just like, I have more photos with me and Afghans. It's unbelievable, because they all wanted to take photos with me. So, but I mean, it's things like that that you really have to think about. And so I'm actually getting ready to do some additional cultural training. Even though I deal with them, we have folks that are embedded with my units today from Bosnia-Herzegovina, as well as Estonia. And, you know, she considers herself, I'm her adopted mom, so she's actually getting a front row seat at my change of command ceremony. She's the daughter of one of the guys who's been here with us for about 5 years, and she calls me Mom General. She's an extremely smart kid. And, you know, I took to her like I mean, you know, when I'm around, she's always with me. And, you know, when you think about just that cultural engagement, and, you know, she may be from Bosnia, but, you know, she's a kid, and she's a bright kid, and I'm just like, man, she's good. I want to do anything I can to, you know, to help her. And so I think it's just, sometimes you just have to be human. And a lot of times when they come in, and I know I go in these environments and I'm the only woman, that's okay. It's not a big deal. I'm used to it now. It used to bother me a lot, but now it doesn't. So I will go through my country training. I will get prepared before I head to Bosnia and Herzegovina here in the summer. I'm actually on the warmer months. It's not too warm, but somewhat warm. So that I am prepared to deal with the officials, so that I'm not causing what we consider to be an international incident by offending someone. Right? And it's something as simple as taking a gift. You know, they give me a gift, I have to take it. Because if I don't, it's considered to be offensive. And I bring a gift, right? So it's things like that that I'm getting all my training before I go ahead. And I'm used to using interpreters, so I've already got that piece down. I know how to, you know, talk and deal with the interpreters. So probably not as much training as I'd like to have, but it's enough. Other questions? Okay, I think that's it.
Well, General Singh, you've given us a lot to think about. I'd like to invite you to come out to the reception if you'd like to ask a question to Major General Singh privately. She'll be there, and thank you all for your attention, and thank you, Major General Singh, very much. Absolutely. For your remarks today.
Absolutely.